Okay, picture this. It's June 1999. You've got an 18-year-old college dropout who's been awake for 60 hours straight, just hunched over a borrowed computer coding. He's got no money, no investors, nothing. And he's working on an idea that pretty much everyone told him was impossible. Well, what he built in that dorm room would end up bringing a $40 billion industry to its knees. This is the story of the teen who broke music. So when the music industry finally managed to crush this kid's creation, you better believe they were popping champagne. They thought they'd won. Total victory, right? But what those execs just didn't get was that their so-called win was actually a catastrophic mistake. Because by destroying this one company, they were about to unleash something so much worse. So how on earth did one teenager working out of a tiny dorm room manage to topple a $40 billion global empire? I mean, how did he outplay every single record label on the planet? Let's dive in and see how this whole revolution got started. All right, so our story kicks off in a pretty bleak-looking, windowless dorm room at Northeastern University back in 1999. And inside is our guy, Shawn Fanning. He's 18, and he is completely, totally obsessed with solving one single problem. Finding music online was just an absolute nightmare. I mean, you have to remember what it was like back then. Before Napster, trying to find an MP3 was just painful. You had to dig through these sketchy IRC chat rooms, deal with broken servers. A single song could literally take 14 hours to download, and that's if your dial-up connection didn't die halfway through. Fanning's vision was just so much simpler, so much cleaner. A single search bar that gave you instant access to this huge library of music, downloaded straight from another person's computer. And here's where his genius really kicked in. See, Fanning knew that building a massive, expensive central server to hold all the music was a non-starter. It would be a huge legal target just waiting to be shut down. So instead, he had this radical idea. What if he just connected everyone's computers to each other? Your hard drive, my hard drive, everyone's hard drive. They'd all become part of one giant shared library. No central vault to attack, no single point of failure. It was brilliant. So in June of '99, he launches the program. He called it Napster, which was actually his nickname because of his curly hair. And his idea didn't just work, it exploded. I mean, it went viral in a way the internet had literally never seen before. The numbers, they're just staggering. By October '99, you've got 150,000 users. 2 months later, by Christmas, over 1 million. And then, just a few months after that, by March 2000, an unbelievable 20 million active users. This was, at the time, the fastest software growth in the history of the internet. In just 9 months, Shawn Fanning went from being this unknown kid to the leader of a massive digital army. And this thing was so huge, it literally started breaking things. You had universities scrambling. At Indiana University, for example, the IT department was completely stunned to find that a whopping 61% of their entire network bandwidth was being eaten up by Napster alone. Their whole system, which was designed for, academic research, was just clogged with students trading music. And just like that, Fanning's whole life was transformed. He went from this shy coder to, a reluctant cult hero. He's on the cover of Time magazine. He's even walking on stage at the MTV VMAs, and in this classic, gutsy move, a direct shot at the band that was about to become his biggest enemy, he's wearing a Metallica t-shirt. The crowd at MTV just went wild. They loved it. But, back in the boardrooms of New York and LA, nobody was cheering. Not one person. The music industry was watching its $40 billion empire start to crack and crumble, and their cozy little world was officially over. They were about to fight back with everything they had. So, the counterattack kicks off in December 1999. The Recording Industry Association of America, you probably know them as the RIA, launches this massive federal lawsuit against Napster. We're talking full-scale legal war. They were demanding up to $100,000 in damages for every single song shared on the platform. But this whole thing went from a dry legal battle to a total public spectacle when Metallica, that Metallica, found a demo of their unreleased song I Disappear, making the rounds on Napster. And their drummer, Lars Ulrich, he was furious. He decided to make this very, very personal. See, Lars Ulrich didn't just sue them. Oh no, he made a show of it. He literally marched into Napster's office with his lawyers, hauling 13 boxes filled with printed out pages. And on those pages, the usernames of 335,435 of his own fans who had shared their music, and he demanded that every single one of them be banned. But this whole stunt, it backfired. Big time. I mean, just catastrophically. Overnight, Lars Ulrich went from rock god to the face of the greedy rock millionaire who sues his own teenage fans. And Shawn Fanning? Well, this just cemented his status. He was now the ultimate underdog, the teenage folk hero, the digital rebel taking on the corporate machine. Now, even with all this public support, the legal battle, well, it wasn't going Fanning's way at all. In February 2001, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals delivered a just absolutely crushing blow. They ruled that, yep, Napster was overwhelmingly liable for copyright infringement. The writing was on the wall. The end was near. So, in one final, desperate Hail Mary, Napster made an offer that was just unprecedented. They went to the record labels and said, look, we will pay you $1 billion over the next 5 years in licensing fees. Just let us turn Napster into a legal paid subscription service. $1 billion. Remember, this is from a startup that had zero revenue. And what did the labels say? They rejected the offer. And they did it in less than 72 hours. See, they didn't want a partner. They wanted a corpse. They wanted to make such a brutal, terrifying example out of Napster that no one would ever dare try something like this again. That court ruling back in February really was the fatal blow. By July 2001, a final injunction forced Napster to shut down. The servers went dark for good. A year later, the company filed for bankruptcy. It was over. The music industry had won. Or so they thought. Because their victory party, it was pretty short-lived. This is where the story takes its final, really ironic twist. Because in killing Napster, the industry didn't solve their problem. No, they created a much, much bigger and way more uncontrollable one. They had created a hydra. You know, it's that classic Hydra effect from mythology. You cut off one head and 2 more grow back in its place. By destroying Napster's centralized servers, that one single point of weakness, the music industry accidentally kicked the evolution of file sharing into high gear, creating networks that were way more resilient. Think about it. All those millions of Napster users, they didn't just stop sharing music. Of course not. They just migrated to new networks. Places like Kazaa, LimeWire, and eventually, the big one, BitTorrent. And unlike Napster, these new platforms were truly decentralized. There was no headquarters to sue, no single server to shut down, no kill switch. The problem had just morphed from one company into a 1,000-headed monster. And the results of the industry's so-called victory? Well, you can see it right here in the numbers. Global music revenue peaked at nearly $39 billion in 1999. It then went into an absolute freefall. A decade later, it had crashed down to just $17 billion. That is a 56% collapse. Their war against this one teenager had literally cost them their kingdom. You know, when you really look back, Napster's biggest legacy wasn't even the software itself. It was the permanent change it burned into an entire generation's brain. It taught all of us that music could be instant, that you didn't need to buy a whole album for one song, and that it could be on demand, whenever you wanted. Napster created the very behavior that someone like Steve Jobs would later brilliantly monetize with the iTunes Store. So in the end, yeah, the labels won every single court battle. They bankrupted the company. They made an example of its young founder. But you know what? None of it actually mattered, because they couldn't make millions of people unlearn what instant access to music felt like. Which really just leaves us with one final question. You can sue a company, you can bankrupt a founder, but can you ever really kill an idea whose time has come?